But in our first hour, I want to get to this topic. This is the essence not only of my new book, Threshold, but it's also the essence, frankly, of this show, the 7 years that we've been doing this show. And I would say in many ways of my life, the work that Louise and I have committed ourselves to throughout our lives. I mean, even long before we were married. Not just the cause of peace and justice, which, and I don't mean this to sound like some kind of pompous ass, but I think all of us, in order to have meaning in our lives, find something that we can that we say, this is what I'm all about. And for some, it is things like, being a great parent, or being a good provider, or being a good friend for others, and I hope I've done all those things. I know I've certainly had no shortage of deficiencies in all those areas, but on net, hopefully. But and in work and whatnot. But I've also had this. I write about this in my book, The Prophet's Way, which is kind of an autobiography, and it's got nothing to do with prophecy. The Prophet's Way is the name of a path through the forest in Germany. But since I was a kid, I've had this notion that the world's in trouble, literally, biologically, and spiritually, and that all of us have some role to play in fixing it. And so I want to get into how we do that in this first hour. I know a week ago today I was talking about how Richard Lovelock, the guy who came up with the Gaia hypothesis, has a new book out in which he's basically saying, okay, that's it, we're screwed. There's going to be maybe 100 million people who are going to survive and live at the poles. Well, that's a very controversial position, and there's a lot of people pushing back on that. And even he himself says, this is basically, if we don't do the right things, if we don't change, if we don't really make a difference. I want to start with an op-ed that's in today's Financial Times. If you subscribe to the Financial Times, you pick up the physical newspaper, and you turn to the editorial page. The entire right-hand column on the editorial pages, the two-page spread, the editorial page spread. And those of you who have been listening for a long time, I used to quote the Wall Street Journal a lot because they used to have great journalism. Ever since Murdoch bought them, it's turned into just another trash paper. And I let my subscription lapse, and I subscribe now pretty much exclusively to the Financial Times for my right-wing Republican internationalist banker news, which is important to keep track of, what these folks are saying about themselves and to themselves and about us. And so here's an op-ed that fills the entire right-hand page, or the right-hand side of the editorial page in the Financial Times today. The headline is, "The Right is Wrong to Attack Obama's Health Plan." It's by Matt Miller. He says the Republican charge that Barack Obama, keep in mind, this is how Europe views the United States. The Republican charge that Barack Obama, although Matt Miller's an American, the Republican charge that Barack Obama is seeking a government takeover, in quotes, of U.S. health care is further proof that American political rhetoric has become detached from reality. Miller points out that Obama's plan basically embraces Mitt Romney's blueprint from Massachusetts and funds it with John McCain's best idea from the presidential campaign. Which, by the way, I have changed my opinion on this. I do think that we should be taxing health benefits. Because I think it's nuts that if I, as a small business person, if I don't incorporate and I want to buy my own insurance, I have to pay income taxes on the money that I use to buy that insurance. If I do incorporate, I don't have to pay. This makes no sense. So, and in fact, as he points out, I'll get to that in a minute, he says, only in America could you co-opt Republican thinking and have critics label you socialist. He says, start with cost. It's easy for foes to feign shock at Obamacare's $1 billion 10-year price tag, or $1 trillion, $1,000 billion 10-year price tag. But $1 trillion just ain't what it used to be. This is just over 1/2 of 1% of GDP over the same period, and barely 3% of the roughly $35 trillion total health care spending during that time. If Mr. Obama's approach is otherwise sensible, the idea that America can't afford it is preposterous. Today's op-ed in the Financial Times goes on to say, Medical bills are shamefully a leading cause of bankruptcy in the United States. It locks budding entrepreneurs into jobs they loathe because their families need the coverage. My point exactly. Over and over and over again, I've made that point. If we had single-payer health care, you would have people like me who have been entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur my whole entire life. Other than working for a few radio stations, well, actually 5 of them, as a DJ for 3 years, a newscaster for 7 years, and a program director for a year back in the late 60s and 70s. And 1 year that I spent as an engineer working for RCA because I needed health insurance because Louise was pregnant with our first child in 1973. Other than that, I haven't had a job all these years. I've always worked for myself. And I continue to. This radio station is owned by a business that I own. It's a small business, a very small business, but it's there. So I've been an entrepreneur all these years, and, you know, the fact of the matter is that when I was in my 20s and 30s, I'm now in my 50s, when I was in my 20s and 30s as an entrepreneur, I was actually able to afford to give my employees health insurance. I remember a company we had, the Woodley Herber Company, in the 1970s in East Lansing, Michigan, Okemos, Michigan. And before that, the electronics joint, a TV repair shop and electronics repair shop that Louise and I owned. And in both of those businesses, we were able to provide our employees with health insurance because Blue Cross Blue Shield at that time in Michigan was a not-for-profit company. All the hospitals were not-for-profit. You didn't see, I mean, the industry hadn't evolved, as it were. This was all pre-Reagan. And I was able to provide health insurance to my employees for $30, $35 per person per month. I mean, it was cheap. And then, you know, in my later year, for example, when Louise and I came back from Germany and we started the ad agency in Atlanta, Chandler, McDonald, Stout, Schneiderman, and Poe, DBA, the newsletter factory, which is still in business in Atlanta. At first, we were not able to offer health insurance because it had just gotten so expensive, and we didn't have it ourselves. I mean, that's how bizarre it is. So anyhow, he goes on to say taxes on employer-provided, this subsidy is so massive at $250 billion a year and regressive. The biggest bounty for those goes to the most generous plans that a phalanx of health economists from both political parties recently begged Congress to trim it. As it turns out, scrapping this tax subsidy was a bold, if unappreciated, centerpiece of Mr. McCain's health plan. So there's that. Yesterday morning, or no, was it yesterday morning or this morning? One of these, well, pretty much every morning, but I think it was this morning, as Louise and I were walking down the dock. We live on a houseboat in the Willamette River, and we were walking down the dock, and there was a beaver carrying some green stuff. He, or I don't know if it was a he or she, there's 2 of them. They built a home underneath our dock. There was a blue heron up on the shore. He's always sitting there, you know, fishing. There were some ducks. We've got some swallows who built a house in our boat. I'll tell you the story about that after we come back. And all of this, in my opinion, ties into the healthcare debate and ties into an absolute disaster waiting to happen in the rainforest that I want to tell you about right after we come back. And to pull all this together, cloned meat in the UK, antibiotics in our meat supply here in the United States, it's all one thing, and it's all about, are we going to have a good life or oblivion?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.